Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Patrolman Roy Caffey. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you're new to my YouTube channel, I tell true crime stories 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I don't know why I did it that way. Anyway, so please subscribe if you're into true crime. Give this video a like so it gets pushed out to more people. I do tell short-form true crime stories over on TikTok. I have roughly 3 million followers or so over there. I tell at least one story every day, so fun. It's not really fun, it's more like sad, but you know what I mean. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, also, I have a Discord server. Feel free to join it if you want. It's linked in the link tree in the description of this video below. And I am just like, whoo, right now. Okay, anyway. But be over the age of 18 if you're going to join it, or else you're going to get kicked out of there. I also sell merch. We ship all over the entirety of this planet that we call Flip-Bob. We call Earth, sorry. Anyway, if also there's a case you want me to cover, please just email me. My email is listed below, or it's mikey at truecrimerertwo.com. Email me just the name of the individual, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I pick my cases at random, so it may be a while before I get to that case, but I will get to it eventually. Anyway, let's get into today's story. I don't know why I'm so weird. Roy Oates Caffey was born on June 25th, 1912, and he was born in Texas. But by the time this story takes place, he is actually living in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Roy had a wife named Mildred, and the two of them, at the time of this story, their son was 15 years old. Roy was described as someone who always loved being outdoors, so he would take his son and they would go hiking, they would go camping, they would go hunting. They loved to fish together, and he loved spending quality time with his son. And his son, Robert, just absolutely loved his dad. Now, 26 years before this case happened, Roy Caffey would join the South Carolina Highway Patrol. He was one of the most well-respected and beloved members of the Highway Patrol there, and there really wasn't many people who could just say anything bad about Roy. Robert, his son, would just say that his dad was just a great man, and he had very strong values, family values. It was 11:20 p.m. on October 8th, 1972. On a very, I guess, desolate part of Interstate 26, just outside of Orangeburg, South Carolina. And this is located specifically at the Highway 601-126 interchange. A patrol car is found just sort of there with its door open. Lying next to the patrol car was a patrolman, and it would be confirmed to be that of Roy Caffey. Roy was deceased. He had been beaten and then also shot 6 times. He had 2 gunshot wounds to his face. He had 3 gunshot wounds to his neck and 1 gunshot wound in his thigh. He was found by a just someone driving down the road, and so this person, obviously this is before cell phones and, you know, even pagers and stuff like that. The person who found him would actually use the patrol car's radio for help, just because, you know, he figured this will get directly to the right people. And so that's when, you know, police arrived at the scene after that. His family was notified, and his son Robert said that, you know, when he was told that night that there was just like this immediate void just left now in his life. But in terms of who did this, they didn't know at the time. There was really no evidence at the crime scene, at least that night, that would point to who did this. So earlier that day, Roy had started his shift at 7 p.m. after spending the day with his family. At about 10 p.m., I guess he assisted with delivering things to the Orangeburg hospital, and so he had dropped off, I guess, a shipment of blood to the hospital. About, a little bit after he did that, he then used his radio to radio dispatch and said he would meet his relief officer at the intersection of Highway 301 and Interstate 26. But according to the other officer that he was supposed to meet, he never got there. Sometime just before 11 p.m., which was just 30 minutes before his brief shift that night would be over, and then he can go back home. And what they believe happened is that Roy had pulled another car over, that this was likely just a very routine traffic stop, whether it would be for speeding or a broken taillight or just something basic. Now, later in the investigation, police would find, I think, at least 3 different witnesses who would say that they were also driving down that same stretch of road when they saw a late model Mustang pulled off to the side of the road with a patrol car behind it. And this would have been in the exact spot that Roy was found deceased. They think the Mustang was maybe red, possibly a maroon dust color. It was late at night, so it was not exactly the easiest thing to spot. And also keep in mind too, like, if you're driving down a dark stretch of road and you just sort of see this, it's not one of those things where you're thinking, I need to pay attention to what I'm seeing, because this will be important later. You're just driving by and you're just noticing these things at a glance. I don't know if I could ever recall something like that. Like, I don't know if my brain would work that way, to be like, oh my God, yeah, I remember seeing, a cop pulling over some person in a maroon colored, I don't know if I remember the details, like it's a maroon colored Mustang, just because of how quickly you pass by. I don't know, it's crazy to me to think that people can remember these things. One of the witnesses, who would actually later on become a patrolman for the highway patrol there, well, he said he saw 2 white males standing outside of the Mustang near where Roy was standing, and that there was another passenger in the vehicle, possibly a female. Then another witness would basically corroborate this by saying they saw 3 total people and then Roy, and he described these people as hippie-like looking people, and one of them, so 2 white males and possibly a white female. At one point, it is believed that at least one of these 3 people had gotten into the patrol car by Roy asking them to get into the patrol car. For what reason, it wasn't known, but they think a fight then broke out within the patrol car because the dome light in Roy's patrol car was busted. It was broken. And then Roy's hat was found, on the ground, and it looked like someone had stepped on it or laid on it. It was all completely compressed down, the hat. But no one witnessed that occur. So people only observed what it sounds like is just the beginning portion of whatever happened. So nobody witnessed a fight, an altercation going on inside the patrol car or outside of it, and nobody witnessed the shooting. The other thing about the shooting was that it was clear that 2 different guns were used. So one of the guns was Roy's gun, a .38 caliber weapon. So his service weapon was actually used to kill him. And then another gun, a .22 caliber, was shot once and into Roy. There were roadblocks put all over the place to see if they could stop anyone and anything that was driving by, and they were basically planning to just question any car that would have driven past these roadblocks. But they never really found, especially a Mustang or a car with 3 people, 2 men and a woman. They never found anything at any of these roadblocks like that. This was well before the technology we have nowadays, and so they didn't really have anything DNA related. There really just wasn't any evidence to point to who did this at the crime scene. And so unfortunately, the case goes cold. 3 years later, sadly, Roy's wife Mildred dies of a heart attack, never knowing what happened to her beloved husband. Robert, their son, would say that, his mom was extremely healthy, that she never had any heart problems before. And so he believes that his mom, by all accounts, died of a broken heart. Her and Roy were madly in love. They were a genuine love story. And so when this happened just so suddenly, it just destroyed her. And eventually it just took her. Robert would say that he felt his youth was taken from him because, you know, at age 15, his dad is dead, and he kind of lived the rest of his youth being worried and afraid, and also concerned that the people who did this weren't ever going to get caught, and now his mom has passed away, and so his life just changed dramatically at the age of 15. During the investigation, you know, police said that the likelihood here is that whoever Roy pulled over was probably, they can't say for sure, maybe had illegal substances in their car, some kind of drugs. Maybe they had a bunch of weapons. Maybe, who knows? They had something illegal in their vehicle in which those three people did not want to get caught having. And so they would kill Roy in order to get away. They wanted to avoid being arrested or anything like that. Maybe these three had just committed a robbery and maybe they were trying to escape and Roy caught them, and maybe he found out, and once they realized, you know, they had to kill him. There was another theory that when Roy pulled these people over, maybe he recognized one of them, maybe he knew one of them, and that made it even worse in terms of identification if they had done something wrong beforehand. You know, there's a whole bunch of theories that just floated around and these ideas that floated around, but the truth of the matter is they didn't have any evidence to support any one of those theories. After the murder, within like, I guess a couple of weeks or so, police learned that there were two soldiers from Fort Gordon in Georgia that had gone AWOL. They just so happened to be driving a maroon Mustang. And according to at least one witness, one of these soldiers would say they wanted to get revenge on all policemen. Those two soldiers who went AWOL for reasons I'm not really sure, they were eventually caught and arrested in Louisiana, but they determined that there was no way they would have been in South Carolina at the time of the murder, and so they were ruled out. Just happened to be coincidence. They were driving a vehicle that was seen at the murder scene. And then a little bit after that, two men were arrested in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. They were driving a car, and when police pulled them over, they noticed that there were police forms in their vehicle. They were actually specifically South Carolina accident report forms that an officer would fill out. And so the police assumed, well, maybe they stole these from Roy's patrol car. But then they discovered that there was a robbery at an automobile agency in South Carolina that also had these forms there. And they learned that these two men had committed that robbery. That's where they got the forms from. And then they were able to rule them out from Roy's murder. In 1975, there was an inmate in Georgia who actually just confessed to killing Roy Caffey in South Carolina, but then doing their own investigation and digging into that, they learned that based on where this person was during Roy's murder, it was physically impossible for him to have committed the murder, and so he was ruled out too. There were rumors that once the story came out of this maroon or rust-colored Mustang, that there were two brothers local to the area of Orangeburg, South Carolina, who had then buried their Mustang under dirt and they had the ability to do so because they had the machinery on their property they lived on to bury the car. And based on witness accounts, the maroon Mustang was actually owned by a woman, and the woman reportedly had let these two men borrow her car on the night of the murder. And then they find out that it's in the news, and now they bury the car. These two brothers were considered to be, they were known criminals. One of them had a very violent past. From what I understand, police could not link any evidence of the murder to these two brothers or the woman. But remember that the witnesses who drove by when Roy was still alive noticed that there were two men and that there was a woman possibly sitting in the car. But the case just went ice cold. Then the calendar keeps rolling and rolling and rolling to February of 1997. 25 or so years after the murder, 41-year-old Betsy Rourke Kemmerlin, who at the time in 1997 was living in Santee, South Carolina, was arrested with connections to the murder of Roy Caffey. She would have been about 16 years old at the time of Roy's murder. Now, according to reports, Betsy was considered a person of interest in the initial investigation, but she would not have been the woman who owned this Mustang that was reportedly buried. Back in 1973 or 4 or something like that, she had been questioned. She had even been polygraphed. And then fast forwarding to 1995, she was interviewed again by police. But at those times, they weren't able to ever, link her to anything. Betsy had a laundry list of a criminal record. I mean, for like things like theft, she had tampered with poker machines, she had committed forgery, she had been arrested for disorderly conduct, and then Unsolved Mysteries would put this case on their show, which, by the way, the segment that featured this case for some reason is not featured in the episode. If you go to watch it, I think it was season 7, episode 9 is when this case aired. But when you go back to watch it on YouTube or wherever, they edit out certain segments from these episodes for whatever reason. This segment was one of those that was edited out. But when the episode originally aired, there would be a few people who came forward after seeing the episode that Betsy had bragged about being involved in the murder of Roy Caffey. So they brought her back in for questioning in 1997 based on these tips. And then she just confessed. She said she was there in the car, the Mustang, the night the murder took place. However, it was not these two brothers that she had reportedly known that were reportedly in the running for whoever the suspects may be. There may be some confusion there with witnesses and whatnot, but she was the sister to one of the two men in the vehicle. So one was her brother. So she said that that night she was in the Mustang in the back seat with her brother, Benjamin Douglas Kemmerlin, and Benjamin's friend, Durham Lee Mizell. Ben would have been 20 years old at the time, and Durham was 28. Durham was just a friend of theirs. However, by 1997, when Betsy is arrested with connection to Roy Caffey's murder, both of those men are dead. Ben, in a sort of twist of fate here, his car had stopped on the highway, and this was actually way back in 1981, and he was struck by a car on the highway. So he was killed on the side of a highway, just like Roy Caffey was. And then in March of 1984, Durham Mizell was shot and killed by his son-in-law during a domestic abuse situation at their house. So Betsy said she was about 16 years old at the time. She had gotten in the car with the two men, one of them being her own brother. The two men were going to be driving around selling pot to people. She said the three of them had also smoked a bunch of the marijuana. She claims she was very sleepy and just sort of dozing off in the back of the car. She remembers that at one point they were outside of Orangeburg, South Carolina, along Interstate 26, when she was sort of falling in and out of sleep, because of how high she was. And then she kind of vaguely remembers both her brother Ben and then Durham getting out of the car and talking to someone. She then says she heard an argument, and then maybe a couple of loud sounds, and then suddenly Ben and Durham got back in the car. When she kind of came to, because apparently she was just she was in and out of sleep, she said she saw Ben and Durham whispering to each other. She says one of them said, "We're in trouble now." The next day, Ben would go to his sister Betsy and say, "We did something bad." And then when she said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Look in the newspaper." And when she looked in the newspaper, there's a story about how a highway patrolman was shot dead on the side of the road near Interstate 26, just outside of Orangeburg. That's when apparently Durham, who was also there when she was looking at the newspaper, and Durham admitted to being involved in the murder to her. And he said, "If you tell anyone about this, we will kill you." Betsy claimed, okay, this is according to her, that, well, of course she's not going to say anything because she was in the car when this murder took place. She was literally a foot or two away from where this happened. And so she can't say anything because she'll be arrested. Police in 1997, when they were then digging further into like these two men, well, police had learned that Durham, well, his wife was shot and killed. He says he told police back in that investigation, when that shooting took place, that she was like cleaning a gun, or someone was cleaning a gun and the gun accidentally went off and she was killed. And her death was ruled an accident. But now that police kind of know about that shooting and the shooting of Roy Caffey, they would end up labeling the wife's death as being suspicious. Betsy tells police in 1997 that the two men took the gun that was used in the murder of Roy Caffey, they put it into a large jewelry box and they buried it somewhere in the Santee Indian Mound, I guess in Clarendon County. She had thought she remembered where this jewelry box was buried, and so it was buried next to this tree. So she took out a map and she showed police where it would have been. Police go there, they look, but that tree is no longer there because there is new like properties and stuff built in this area. They dug where they could and they never found anything. They never found the gun. There was that belief that those two brothers who may have been involved had buried the car. And I don't know this for sure, but it sounds like Betsy said the car that they were in was actually buried, but they never found that car either. They searched the properties where it could have been buried, but they never found it. So Betsy was charged with connection to the murder of Roy Caffey, and then she was placed on house arrest. She apparently tried to purchase a .22 caliber pistol when she's on house arrest, and so she is then brought into jail, and her house arrest is revoked. In February of 1999, Betsy agreed to plead guilty to accessory after the fact. She was given a 10-year suspended sentence and 5 years of probation. They really had no choice but to offer her this plea deal because all they really had was her word. They did not have any evidence. They never found the gun. They never found the car. They never found anything. The two men who physically committed the murder were both dead. Now, Betsy had no reason or no motives to confess to this and ratting these two men out. And so they believed the story. I mean, this is a believed story that these two men were the ones to commit the murder and that Betsy was in the car when it happened. This is, this can be backed up by many witnesses who drove by, saw two white men outside of this Mustang, and they all saw a woman sitting in the car. And so it does track. It does all add up. I guess the question remains, though, was Betsy telling the truth with regards to her involvement? Was she really in and out of sleep in the back of the car? And did she really not actually see it happen? Who knows? Between 2000 and 2009, Betsy would be in and out of jail for various different things. And by 2009, Betsy dies. So now, all three people who were allegedly involved in the murder of Officer Roy Caffey, they're all dead. I guess you can look at this as kind of like, well, the two men did die fairly soon-ish after the murder took place, and so they weren't able to go on and kill a bunch more people. I mean, unfortunately, Durham's wife, who was shot and killed reportedly accidentally, she died before Roy did. So there was, I guess you can kind of look at it as if, these two men died fairly quickly, like I said, after Roy's death within a decade or so. So they didn't really get much opportunity to hurt or kill anyone else. So I guess that's a good thing. And Betsy may have gotten away with murder if she was more involved, or she was telling the truth and she was asleep basically when the murder happened. And she really was just an accessory after the fact, hiding the truth and just sort of keeping everyone in the dark, which is still just as bad, depending on how you look at it. In November of 2014, states and local officials there in South Carolina would dedicate 2 different rest stops along Interstate 26 to Roy Caffey. Patrolman First Class Roy Caffey, to be specific. And so Robert, his son, who vowed to always stick with this case until it finally got resolved, he finally got resolution. He may not be true justice, considering the 2 men were dead and all they really had left over was Betsy, but they at least got the answers. So they got the conclusion, and justice may have not been totally served in this case, but the killers met their maker. They didn't die of natural causes. One guy was hit by a car, almost in a beautiful poetry, on the side of Interstate 26. And then the other guy, again, almost by beautiful poetry, was shot dead. So justice may have not been served in the legal form, but justice in a weird, twisty way was given to Roy Caffey. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, ho ho ho, bitches! You all a bunch of hoes. Different area codes. I'm fuck. I'm gonna jingle all the way out of here.